Have you ever noticed the exact moment the temperature in the room completely changed? You simply said no to physical intimacy. It wasn't a grand rejection or a calculated attack, just a simple personal boundary. But the reaction you received didn't match the situation at all. Suddenly, you were staring at a complete stranger, and the silence became instantly weaponized. Why does a simple no trigger such a profound, terrifying panic? You probably spent hours replaying that exact scenario in your head, wondering what you did wrong. You asked yourself if you were being too cold, too sensitive, or just unfair. The guilt started creeping in, whispering that maybe you should have just given in to keep the peace. But your intuition was screaming at you. You felt it in your chest. You knew that their intense, freezing withdrawal wasn't normal. You weren't imagining things. Nobody talks about this specific kind of psychological punishment, but it follows a very precise behavioral pattern. When you share a bed with someone, you assume that physical connection is an expression of shared affection. You believe it represents mutual vulnerability. But to a highly manipulative personality, the bedroom isn't a place of connection at all. It is a deeply controlled testing ground for their power over your reality. Think back to how it felt when the punishment began. One moment things seemed perfectly fine, and the next, you were plunged into an Arctic freeze. They might have turned their back to you, sighing heavily in the dark, making sure you felt the weight of their profound disappointment. Or perhaps they stormed out entirely, leaving you alone with racing thoughts. The message was incredibly clear: your body belongs to their expectations. You were made to feel that your personal boundaries were actually a direct insult to their entire existence. The emotional withdrawal was designed to make you panic, to make you reach out and apologize for having a basic human limit. This is the unseen reality of a behavioral dynamic where compliance is heavily expected. When you withhold physical access, you are pulling the ultimate plug on their main source of emotional regulation. It is crucial that you understand you are not crazy for feeling deeply unsettled by this reaction. The sudden shift from a romantic partner to a punishing adversary is incredibly jarring to the human nervous system. You were experiencing a covert form of emotional coercion. They weren't just sad about a lack of physical closeness. They were experiencing a severe psychological threat. Your gentle rejection felt like absolute betrayal. The truth is, their panicked reaction had absolutely nothing to do with genuine desire or romantic passion. Real love respects a boundary without throwing a calculated, silent tantrum. Real intimacy requires two willing participants who feel safe saying no. What you witnessed was the collapse of a carefully constructed facade. By denying them physical access, you accidentally exposed the fragile illusion of their absolute control over you. You probably felt a heavy, lingering anxiety the next morning. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, filled with unsaid accusations. They wanted you to feel responsible for their emotional dysregulation. This is a classic power play used to condition your future behavior. They are teaching you that saying no carries a very high emotional cost. It is a systematic training process designed to erode your bodily autonomy over time entirely. What most people never realize is how deeply calculating this specific type of bedroom discard really is. It looks like a wounded ego, but it is actually a highly sophisticated mechanism of control. By weaponizing intimacy, they turn your own empathy against you. They know that you care about their feelings, so they perform intense emotional pain to make you feel like the abuser. It is a masterful, devastating inversion of reality. You have carried the weight of those silent, agonizing nights for far too long. You questioned your own worth, wondering why your physical boundaries made you so entirely unlovable in their eyes. But their coldness was never a reflection of your true value. It was merely a reflection of their deep psychological starvation. Now, we are going to look behind the curtain and uncover exactly why your simple no destroyed their entire world. Here is what was really happening beneath the surface of that freezing silence. To a deeply manipulative individual, physical intimacy is not about shared pleasure or emotional closeness. It is entirely about extraction. They need your undivided attention, your physical submission, and your energetic focus the way a fire desperately needs oxygen to survive. When you are physically engaged with them, you are entirely focused on their needs. When you politely declined their advances, you didn't just deny them a physical act. You committed the ultimate behavioral offense. You reminded them that you are a separate human being. You proved that you have your own mind, your own desires, and your own timeline. For someone who requires absolute psychological fusion to feel safe, your sudden individuality is terrifying. It shatters the delusion that they own your internal world completely. The part nobody tells you is that their panic is entirely genuine, but not for the reasons you believed. They are not heartbroken. They are psychologically starved. Your compliance is their mirror. When you participate, the mirror reflects a powerful, perfectly in control individual. But the moment you establish a firm physical boundary, that mirror completely shatters. Suddenly, they are forced to look directly at their own emptiness. This is where the dynamic gets incredibly disturbing. Because they cannot process feelings of inadequacy or rejection, they must immediately transfer those intolerable emotions onto you. This is why the silent treatment and the cold shoulder are instantly deployed. If they can make you feel anxious, guilty, and out of control, they quickly regain their own sense of psychological balance. Your internal chaos completely becomes their ultimate comfort. They use the bedroom as a stage to test your psychological compliance. It is a deeply vulnerable environment where your defenses are naturally lowered. If they can manipulate you into crossing your own physical boundaries just to keep the peace, they know they have successfully compromised your core identity. Your reluctant submission is far more valuable to them than your genuine desire, because it proves their absolute dominance over your will. You felt the deep injustice of it all. They accused you of being cold, frigid, or unloving, projecting their own severe emotional deficits entirely onto you. When they accused you of exactly what they were doing themselves, it was meant to confuse you. They take their own profound inability to connect authentically and blame you for the resulting distance. It is a brilliant, entirely destructive method of escaping behavioral accountability. Every time they stormed out of the room or aggressively turned their back to you, they were running a behavioral script. It is an emotional hostage situation. The ransom they demand is your bodily autonomy. They are actively trying to train your nervous system to associate the word no with immediate danger and abandonment. Over time, it becomes easier to just surrender rather than endure the agonizing, prolonged silence of their punishment. But you must understand the deep psychological fragility behind their aggressive posturing. A truly powerful, emotionally secure person does not crumble when faced with a gentle rejection. They do not need to punish their partner to feel safe in the world. The intense panic they exhibit when you deny them intimacy is actually a massive exposure of their extreme internal weakness. They are entirely dependent on your constant, unwavering validation. This changes everything about how you view those terrible nights. They wanted you to believe that you were the problem, that your lack of desire was destroying the relationship. But their intense dysregulation was a confession. It was loud, undeniable proof that without your constant emotional and physical energy feeding their fragile ego, they possess absolutely nothing of substance. Your simple boundary threatened to starve their false self. And that is when the truth finally appears. The bedroom discard was never about your attractiveness or your capacity for love. It was a calculated behavioral response to losing access to their primary source of emotional regulation. You were unknowingly holding all the power in the room. By simply choosing your own comfort over their endless demands, you forced them into a state of psychological withdrawal that they could not possibly handle. You thought the silent treatment meant they were pulling away and preparing to leave you. You assumed their coldness was a sign that they had finally lost interest and were moving on to someone else. That is exactly what they wanted you to believe. But here is the massive plot twist that changes the entire narrative. They never stopped monitoring you for a single second. Their physical withdrawal was actually an intensely active form of engagement. While they were lying with their back to you, radiating intense anger and disappointment, their entire focus was entirely locked onto your reactions. They were carefully listening to your breathing. They were waiting to hear if you were crying softly in the dark. They were aggressively analyzing your silence to see if their punishment was successfully breaking your resolve. They were never actually ignoring you. They were obsessively studying you. You thought you were fundamentally weak because their coldness caused you such profound anxiety. You believed that your desperate attempts to apologize and fix the situation proved that you were overly dependent on them. But the reality is the exact opposite. You were actively surviving an intense psychological assault. Your nervous system was desperately trying to navigate a highly dangerous emotional environment created by a master manipulator. You thought they completely won every time you finally gave in just to end the agonizing tension. You believed your eventual surrender proved their absolute dominance and your complete failure. But here is what was truly happening behind the scenes. Every time you witnessed their childish, panicked reaction to your simple boundary, you were silently gathering crucial data. You were slowly seeing the fragile reality beneath their confident mask. They truly believed they were successfully training you to never say no again. They thought the punishment of the bedroom discard was cementing their absolute authority over your physical self. But they entirely miscalculated human nature. Instead of teaching you to comply, their extreme reactions were actually teaching you how dangerous they truly were. They were actively dismantling your trust and slowly destroying any genuine affection you had. You thought they did not care about you at all when they coldly rejected your attempts at reconciliation. The truth is much darker and incredibly validating. They cared immensely, but only about your utility. They were absolutely terrified of your growing independence. The colder they became, the more internal panic they were actively trying to manage. Their perceived strength was nothing more than an elaborate cover for massive psychological fear. Think about the immense power it takes to terrify a controller simply by existing in your own space. You didn't yell. You didn't manipulate. You simply said, "Not tonight," and their entire internal universe violently collapsed. That is the ultimate revelation. You always believed you were the fragile one in the dynamic, constantly walking on eggshells. But you were actually the structural foundation holding up their entire psychological reality. This realization entirely shifts the balance of power. The person who needs to terrorize their partner over a simple physical boundary is not a powerful figure. They are an emotional infant trapped inside an adult body, completely unable to self-regulate without a human pacifier. You were never fighting a strong, secure partner. You were dealing with an incredibly disordered personality desperately trying to mask its own profound inadequacies. You thought their absolute withdrawal was the ultimate punishment that proved your complete lack of worth. But looking back, that withdrawal was actually your first real taste of authentic emotional freedom. In those quiet, agonizing moments when they refused to look at you, they accidentally gave you the space to observe their madness objectively. Their punishment inadvertently became the very catalyst for your total psychological awakening entirely. By trying to break you through the bedroom discard, they accidentally handed you the exact map to your own salvation. They showed you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that their love was entirely conditional upon your absolute physical submission. Once you truly understand that deeply transactional nature of their affection, the powerful illusion shatters completely. You thought you were losing a partner, but you were actually uncovering an imposter. We all inherently crave a sense of profound emotional justice when we have been mistreated so severely. You might hope for a dramatic moment of universal karma to completely balance the scales. But the psychological reality of their specific behavioral patterns guarantees a punishment far worse than anything you could actively inflict. By demanding absolute control over physical intimacy, they permanently destroy their ability to experience real connection. When someone consistently uses the bedroom as a psychological battleground, they eliminate the possibility of authentic love entirely. Genuine intimacy requires deep trust, mutual vulnerability, and absolute emotional safety. Because they actively weaponize those exact elements to completely control you, they can never actually experience them. They are permanently locked out of the deepest, most fulfilling aspects of the human emotional experience. Their future is defined by a shallow, endless cycle of completely transactional encounters. They will move on to new partners, desperately seeking the exact same physical submission they demanded from you. The initial stages might look incredibly passionate and perfect from the outside. But beneath the surface, the exact same psychological starvation remains permanently unresolved. They are doomed to endlessly repeat the exact same behavioral script. Imagine the profound, crushing exhaustion of living a life where everyone is viewed purely as a resource. They can never truly rest. They must constantly monitor their partners for any slight shift in compliance. Every simple no from a future partner will trigger the exact same terrifying panic they experienced with you. Their internal world is a state of perpetual, hidden paranoia, constantly guarding against the inevitable loss of total control. They essentially build their own psychological prison out of their intense need for dominance. Because they punish authenticity and demand strict compliance, they guarantee that nobody will ever love them for who they truly are. They only receive the terrified, conditioned responses of the people they have completely manipulated. Deep down, in the absolute quietest moments of their lives, they profoundly realize that their connections are entirely fake. This deeply ingrained emotional isolation is the ultimate justice. They may present a highly confident, incredibly successful facade to the outside world. They might boast about their new relationships and their perceived happiness. But the moment the lights go out and they are alone with their own thoughts, the profound emptiness immediately returns. No amount of forced physical compliance can ever fill a fundamentally broken psychological structure. You must recognize that their inability to handle your boundaries is a permanent condition. They cannot simply learn how to be a healthy partner with someone else, because the core behavioral mechanism is profoundly flawed. They don't want a partner, they want a completely obedient extension of themselves. This rigid requirement guarantees a lifetime of heavily fractured relationships, deep distrust, and an overwhelming sense of chronic internal void. Watching them walk away, or finally walking away yourself, might feel like a massive loss initially. But you are essentially handing them back to their own unavoidable misery. The absolute tragedy of their existence is that they destroy the very people who attempt to love them the most. They pushed you away with their coldness, actively sabotaging the one genuine connection that might have actually offered them some semblance of real emotional peace. The justice you seek is simply the natural, unavoidable consequence of their own behavioral architecture. They are permanently trapped in a highly reactive, incredibly fragile state of existence. They will spend their entire lives continuously chasing a sense of absolute security that does not exist. Their desperate need to control physical boundaries will ultimately alienate every single person who ever genuinely tries to get incredibly close to them. You survived their attempts to break you, but they can never actually survive themselves. The bedroom discard was a desperate, panicked attempt to secure their power, but it ultimately cemented their absolute downfall. By weaponizing intimacy, they ensured that they will die without ever knowing what it feels like to be truly loved without condition. Their ultimate punishment is simply existing exactly as they are, entirely unable to change their nature. Now, it is time to completely remove your energetic focus from their broken psychological landscape. Their deep inability to handle human boundaries is no longer your problem to solve or navigate. We must return the focus to where it truly belongs: your incredible capacity for survival and recovery. You lived through a deeply insidious form of psychological warfare that was specifically designed to erode your absolute connection to your own physical body. Reclaiming your bodily autonomy is the most profound step in your healing journey. For so long, your nervous system was completely hijacked, trained to view physical boundaries as a source of extreme danger and conflict. Now, you get to actively reprogram that entire system. You get to rediscover the absolute beauty of your own no. Your boundaries are not a weapon used to harm others. They are the highly sacred walls that protect your internal peace. You are allowed to take your space back completely. You are allowed to sleep peacefully in a bed without the constant, terrifying fear of unspoken retribution. The heavy, suffocating anxiety that used to fill the room has finally lifted. In its place is a highly profound, deeply healing stillness. You no longer have to perform, submit, or actively shrink yourself just to prevent another human being from experiencing an extreme emotional collapse completely. Think about the incredible resilience it took to trust your own intuition when everything around you was intensely manipulated. Even when they tried to convince you that your lack of desire was a massive character flaw, a quiet, powerful voice inside you knew the absolute truth. You protected your core identity even when it felt incredibly dangerous to do so. That fierce, undeniable self-preservation is the exact foundation of your entire new reality now. The clarity you possess now is absolutely priceless. You can finally see the behavioral patterns clearly, stripping away the deep confusion that kept you entirely trapped. You understand that their coldness was never about your worth, and their panic was never about genuine love. This profound understanding completely immunizes you against future manipulation. You will never again allow someone to use your beautiful empathy as a highly destructive weapon. As you step into this newfound emotional freedom, you will slowly begin to trust yourself again entirely. You will learn to honor your physical needs and limits without a single ounce of deeply ingrained guilt. The profound damage they attempted to inflict on your self-esteem was completely temporary. Beneath the heavy scars, your capacity for genuine connection, mutual respect, and deeply authentic intimacy remains absolutely, completely, entirely intact. You are no longer actively walking on eggshells around a highly fragile, entirely unpredictable ego. You are walking firmly on solid ground, guided purely by your own highly developed inner wisdom. The massive energy you used to waste trying to perfectly manage their extreme emotional dysregulation is now entirely yours to invest in your own brilliant future. You are taking back all of the absolute power they so desperately tried to systematically steal. It is completely normal to still feel moments of lingering grief or sudden waves of intense anger. Healing is a highly complex, non-linear process that requires massive amounts of gentle self-compassion. But every single day that you honor your own limits, you actively repair the deep psychological damage they caused. You are meticulously building an absolutely beautiful, deeply authentic life where forced compliance is never mistaken for genuine affection. You have successfully crossed the absolute hardest threshold. You looked directly into the dark, completely chaotic reality of a highly manipulative dynamic and firmly chose your own survival. You refuse to let their brokenness actively define your entire physical reality. You are incredibly strong, profoundly wise, and perfectly free to write an entirely new narrative. The absolute darkest chapters of this deeply painful emotional story are now permanently closed. You no longer have to exist as a mere emotional resource for someone else's fragile ego. The profound silence you now experience is not a punishment, but a deeply beautiful, healing peace. By saying no, you accidentally broke their entire world, but you successfully saved your own. The absolute greatest punishment for a manipulative personality is watching the person they desperately tried to profoundly break finally become entirely impossible to control.